Hello and welcome to the Working Tools Masonic Podcast, where today we will be interviewing Most Worshipful Brother Barry Burch, past Grand Master of British Columbia and the Yukon.
Ladies and gentlemen, brethren all, welcome to the Working Tools Podcast, a casual conversation around Freemasonry. First, it's important to note that our opinions and thoughts are our own and do not reflect those of our Grand Lodge or respective craft or concordant bodies. Please connect with us and ask questions, either here on YouTube or on our Facebook page. We'd also appreciate a thumbs up and especially any comments on our videos.
Thank you for joining us for part 3, I think, of our discussion with Most Worshipful Brother Barry Burch, past Grand Master of British Columbia and the Yukon. I'm Matt Appel. I am a Mason here in Washington State, along with David Colbeth. And we have also with us one of our usual hosts, Worshipful Brother Steven Chung from up in British Columbia. And, as I mentioned already, Most Worshipful Brother Barry, who's put out a paper not too long ago called We're All in This Together, and we're going to be continuing our discussion of that from last week with sort of a talk about 3 things that Grand Lodge can do now to help facilitate the Masonic experience in the lodges. So first of all, thank you, Most Worshipful Sir, for coming out this evening.
Well, thank you again for having me on. These are, I think, important moments for us in any way that we can engage in conversation and discussion to keep the craft alive in the absence of meeting in person, I think is very commendable. So thank you for doing this, and thank you for having me on.
So just to say for everybody, I think so this week was all sorts of Masonic stuff going on this week. You in British Columbia, you guys had your Masonic day today. Was that today?
Yes, it was.
So, and we had there was the Esotericism and Masonry conference that just happened yesterday on Zoom, and it seems like all sorts of things happened this weekend. So it's a sort of a confluence. We appreciate you spending even more time on Zoom with us here. So I guess my question is, what sort of brought you to this question of what Masonry can do for your Masonic experience? Is it just something you've been thinking about, or as Grand Master, did you have a program for that, or?
Well, I wrote the original paper when I was senior deacon on a request to get a little bit of insight as to how I was seeing the near future. So it just seemed to me that in these times it was even more relevant. Our Masonic world's been turned upside down, and we really do need to stay engaged with one another to keep each other, kind of online with our Masonic principles. It's very difficult in these times, it seems to me, to particularly when you were kind of isolated from one another, to keep those tenets and principles alive and on top of mind. There's all sorts of other stresses and strains going on in our lives. So I put this, kind of revisited this paper in more current context. And, I think we've had some really useful discussions here about what each of us can do as Masonic brothers, and how our lodge can contribute and make things a little more palatable as a Freemason right now. And it logically follows that Grand Lodge has a role to play in this process as well. And so, when you're the Grand Master of a jurisdiction, you have a lot of responsibilities and a lot of discretionary power and so on and so forth. But really, you boil it all down. What it comes down to is, am I, as your Grand Master, serving the interests of the brethren, and are we moving our craft in the direction that we need to move in order to maintain our relevance and to provide that kind of Masonic experience that each of us expects to receive as a Masonic brother. So really, in the end, that's what it all comes down to. So, we're now in this conversation at that point where I think it's quite reasonable for brethren to say, all right, Grand Lodge, how can you make things better for my Masonic experience? What can you do to help move that forward? And so, that's the question, and that's the one, as a Grand Lodge officer, and both David and Matt, you've been district deputies, so you understand those responsibilities. Steven, you've been a master of a lodge, so in each of those roles, you have a responsibility and an accountability. So, at this point now, it's Grand Lodge is the focus for how they can make that contribution. So
I should probably jump in here and say that although, David and I, like as you said, have been district deputies, and I know he serves on a committee now for Grand Lodge, and I do, and honestly, I'm not sure, Steve, if you do or not, but either way, it doesn't really matter. The point is that we are none of us speaking for our Grand Lodges this evening. This is all sort of our opinions, and yes. I don't want any of this to be misconstrued as next thing you know, Grand Lodge is going to do this, and we're not speaking in that way. This is just our opinions and our personal opinions. So, yes,
thank you. I should have mentioned that. Yes, I used to be, but I'm not anymore.
Right.
Yeah, it's in the intro, but just want to make double sure here.
Says to me right after the installation where I became immediate past Grand Master, Jim says, "Knock, knock," and of course, what do you respond? Who's there? His response was, "Not you." so that's a good reminder. Yes, we're not speaking for our Grand Lodges. This is
just our own opinions.
Discussion.
Yes.
So before we started, David, you said you had like a list of 4 things. Is that, you want to go ahead and get us started, or?
Well, I wasn't sure if we were going to come back to this. So we had really lent Barry's time, Grandmaster's time, and so I wasn't sure if we were going to get to the third thing. So my original notes I had discarded actually on the third topic, on this third item, and so I spent some time and thought, what do I want Grand Lodge to do? And ultimately, I have a little bit different insight. As Matt alluded, I'm still on the Long Range Planning Committee for Grand Lodge. I was chairman for a couple of years, and during that time we again revised the Grand Lodge Long Range Plan, and this time, instead of trying to create a multi-page document and a true strategic plan, we wanted to create more of a pillars or supports, a framework that could be used to guide the decisions. And so we when we look at more than one resource, we call it research, but it was plagiarism. We looked at pretty heavily at Grand Lodge of BC and Yukon and Grand Lodge of California and other Grand Lodges and what their long-range plans were. And you will see some very similar items in our long-range support document. But four of the 6, we call them the 6 supports, and the 4 of them directly relate to what I would like to see our Grand Lodge do and continue to do. Our Grand Lodge, I think, has done recently, for sure, in the last 3 or 4 months, has done a good job of trying to provide education online. We've started twice a month now. The leadership committee does online training. We've had 2 or 3 of them now. And as well, our senior Grand Warden did the 6 Steps program virtually, and it was very well attended. And so I think they're trying to do some good stuff online. So 4 of the supports are membership experience, Masonic education, leadership and management, and beyond the lodge. So the first, membership experience: engage and retain members and their families through an enhanced, sustaining, and relevant membership experience. And so I think The families part could be enhanced a little bit, but I know that they're through our Washington Masonic Charities, they're working on what they call the Masonic Care, Masons Care program, which is our Widows Outreach program, and they're really emphasizing that. Byron Creature, who is a member of the staff member of the Washington Masonic Charities and a brother, he has been on all of the district meetings talking about Washington Masonic Charities and the things they're doing, and there's been a great response. Unfortunately, there's been some tragedy in our Grand Lodge. One of our lodges was burned to the ground, Malden, Washington, and actually the whole city, most of the city was burned.
Oh, wow.
And so Washington Masonic Charities was able to step in and really facilitate opportunities for helping the Masons and the community. So it really brought Masonic Charities to light, and it was great to have that system already in place, essentially, to help those. So engaging and retaining members, I think, is we as Masons and Grand Lodge could do a better job. I think Washington Masonic Charities is doing a good job, but technically they're a separate group, right? So I think they could continue, Grand Lodge can continue to engage and retain members and families. The Masonic Education, like I've said, they're doing a pretty good job of educating now. I think it was a big step for them to allow the education to be online and to be recorded. The Lodge Leadership Retreat, which is a multi-day series of classes that we have every year, was not allowed to happen, of course. And so they delayed it, and then it wasn't allowed to happen again. And so the Lodge Leadership, I happen to be on that committee as well. And we talked about what we could do, and we said, hey, let's do this virtually. I'm pushing virtually. And so we decided to take the chairman, polled all of the deacons and deputies and everybody, and said, just from the titles of the classes, didn't even have the descriptions, just from the titles, what are the top classes you'd like to see? And so we took the top 6 or 8 classes, and we're doing those virtually. So this last one was on leadership. It was actually a really great leadership class. Our senior grand warden taught that one. And so what I think, again, we could do is maybe continue to educate the community about the fraternity's intriguing and enduring history. Although we've been doing commercials on TV and on radio for how long, Matt? Like 4 years, I think now, or 5. It's been quite a long time. It's a great program that our PR committee, Roger Nelson, very worshipful Roger Nelson, implemented through a statewide communication group. I don't know the details and the name of it, but it's a really cool program. The only other organization they've ever done this with is the Washington National Guard, but basically it's a discounted opportunity for unique organizations. And so if you watch TV, you'll see these commercials quite regularly, or if you listen to the radio, they're on quite regularly. And a little small story, I was at a retirement party the other day, and the folks that were there were talking about, they didn't know much about Masons, didn't know my friend was a Mason that was there. And they said, yeah, I hear it on TV and I see it on the radio, hear it on the radio all the time. And so it was a neat opportunity to talk about that program and that it's actually doing some things. And we're getting, of course, some leads, if you will, inquiries of men that are learning and want to learn about Masonry. So again, we're doing an okay job of that. I think we could continue to provide community or non-Masonic focused or non-Masonic directed education and talk about as it says in the long range plan, the intriguing and enduring history, values, practical application of our principles, and relevance to today's society. I think Most Worshipful Russ Cervonia is a great example of the opportunity for that through the civility program. And so, boy, especially in these times, what an opportunity for Masons in that civility program to really say, hey, we've got something that can help people work through things, if you will. I'm going to skip leadership management for because I've got a little bit of a rant there. But beyond the lodge, instill a wider Masonic perspective inside and outside the fraternity by deepening the connection between members, lodges, the worldwide body of Freemasonry, concord organizations, and the public at large. So I think I talked about that a little bit, that connecting to the community and connecting to others, continuing to connect now to other organizations. So Matt talked about the esoteric seminar, the conference that went on this weekend. So that's the opportunity for Masons from outside of other areas. And so I think, could our Grand Lodge facilitate something like that? Matter of fact, on one of the district meetings, Very Worshipful Brother Richard Kovac was on there, and he said something about teaching and training, and he said, "Hey, let's chat afterwards." And so, of course, a 5-minute conversation ends up being an hour with with any Mason usually. And so he and I talked about the idea of, because he was attending that, he had just gone to the Masonic Day or Masonic Con, the virtual Masonic Con conference. And he said, we need to bring something like that to Washington or the West Coast. I said, yes, I've been wanting to do something for a long time. I just don't have the bandwidth. And so he and I talked for quite a long time, and he tried to say, well, I'd really like you to be the champion. And I said, well, I'd really like you to be the champion. So we need to find a champion, Matt, that wants to run one of those. But
I will gladly support you from mine.
Exactly. Everybody wants to support. So the last thing I'm leaving is the leadership and management. It says strengthen our leaders and cultivate new ones, strengthen management and governance effectiveness at all levels. I think that's something that Masons, and especially Grand Lodge or Grand Lodges or international organizations, maybe a Scottish Rite or York Rite or whatever, we talk a lot about management of lodges and management of members and management of things. But I think leadership and management they're tied together. You can't separate them really. But leadership is different than management. And so I was talking to, I think I was our Grand Secretary a while back, about the idea of leadership. And because I had made calls with our lodge leadership tree talking about what classes you like to see. And a lot of them were talking about, it's called the Lodge Leadership Retreat, but it's really a lot of classes about management of the lodge and management of members and management of the books and relationships and that kind of stuff. It's not so much about leadership. And so I thought, why isn't Harvard coming to us and saying, whoa, what is this awesome leadership program you have as Masons? And we need to know what that is. Or whatever university, insert whatever university name. If we don't have something, which we don't, we should go out and look at the Harvard University Leadership Program or whatever prestigious university. I know that BC and UConn, you guys have the leadership. What was that, Matt? We had that interview with that I can't think of that guy's name. I'm sorry. He was in the middle of a leadership program that studied. One of the requirements was to check with other Grand Lodges.
Yes. Yeah. That's most brother Stephen Godfrey.
Yeah. That was a neat idea. And so I think our Grand Lodge could do a better job of, I'm not a fan of recreating the wheel. I think that it'd be better to take Harvard's, if there is one, Harvard's leadership program and just adapt it to Masonry, so that when Harvard spends millions of dollars and identifies a new leadership training system, then we can just adapt their new leadership system. Because I think leadership, we talked about it, it was just released last week about how applying the tenets of Masonry is effective in business. And so I think that we can learn a lot from just general leadership training. It doesn't have to be specific to Masonry. So I'll get off my soapbox now, but sorry. So those are my 4 things. Who's next?
Steve, do you have thoughts?
Well, I have a lot of thoughts. They're pretty random, but the one thing that I think that our Grand Lodge can be doing for us now in these times is maybe communicating better directly with the membership. I think that there are a lot of secretaries and lodges that are not active at the moment because they've gotten away from the meetings. They've gotten away from doing everything on a regular basis. So their activity is pretty dormant. And a lot of secretaries, for example, aren't checking their email on a regular basis because they don't think anything's happening. Yet there's an email comes out from Grand Lodge that says, please forward this to your membership. This is happening this weekend. And, it's of time-sensitive nature. Now, thankfully, in my lodge, there's a fellow who oversees the email program, and sends out the messages on behalf of the secretary when he's not on top of things, right? So we have backups in place for several things in our lodge that way. We have a backup for our treasurer and so on. It's a good thing that we do in our lodge to support each other, right? But I noticed the Grand Lodge had sent out the message to the lodges, but not to all the membership. And maybe it's because they don't have a current database or something like that. But maybe, the old-fashioned thing of picking up the phone and letting the secretaries know there's things in their mailbox and how you doing, by the way, we haven't heard from you in a while, right? Just that personal touch or something like that, just a little more effective communication. Because I know there's a lot of guys, that are, wonder what's happening, what's Grand Lodge doing right now, and I think that getting the message out as to what they are doing is very important. The EB we have goes out electronically, and it's become a very large document. And some of the brethren have commented that they've not gone through the whole thing just because it's way too long. Others have commented what awesome content there is and so much of it, right? So, like you say, you can please some of them some of the time, but not all of them none of the time, right? But yeah, that was my number one thing that I couldn't really think of a lot of things that I could ask Grand Lodge to do now in these times to improve our lodge experience. That was really the one thing that stood out. The other, it just comes to mind. Another thing that they could be doing is helping lodges that are not technology savvy, get up to speed with that and their memberships. Maybe a little bit of education for some of the lodge officers or something like that as to the tools they have available to them. All these things are there, and for us that use them every day, they're second nature, right? We don't even think about it. But some of the lodges that maybe are a little more rural and aren't technology savvy, and they're not adopting these things into their lodge or haven't until this point, maybe they need some help in this manner, so they can communicate with their brethren. Interesting.
David, your comment earlier on about, I think, education. The key thing that I heard there was the Grand Master was asking the brethren, what's most important for you? What topics should we be discussing? What topics should we be marshaling some resources to deliver? I mean, that's, to me, that's a key role. It's a very, very important part of a Grand Lodge, is reaching out, asking, and trying to respond. So, I mean, that's the difference between management and leadership. Management is a set of skills and a set of policies and procedures. Leadership is identifying what's needed through a variety of ways, putting a plan together and inspiring brethren to take it up. So, that it's encouraging. It's encouraging to hear that the Grand Master is reaching out. That's pretty important. And Steven, your comment about communicating, I know firsthand, part of the challenge of communications. How do you manage that? We've got 133 lodges and 5,600 brethren. So we do know from past experience that we don't have the contact information for a portion of those brethren, and so the communication protocol typically Masonically is Grand Master to district deputies to district lodges. typically kind of how it works. So, and I agree. So this is the reason why, one of the reasons why I put this paper together again, revisit it, is because it's kind of a dead zone over the summer. There's a lot of lodges don't meet. We go dark. And so traditionally, there's not a lot of communication between brethren over summer months in most areas. This year was different because of the challenges that we've had in terms of not being able to meet. So we've actually, in many lodges, been communication over the summer has been substantially greater than it's ever been. Again, because a number of brethren and a number of masters and a number of district deputies wanted to keep brethren engaged. And so you find ways to do that. So,
yeah, most definitely. The other thing that I was trying to figure out how to help the lodge in was, all the guys that were in the 6-step program before, before COVID started, is there maybe something that, maybe those, maybe Grand Lodge could host a Zoom event where there's, like one of those Masonic days where we hold an open thing to the public, and there's different presentations, and maybe it's only a 3-hour thing. Maybe it's only a 2-hour thing with some bits on it that are well thought out and planned, that are going to answer a lot of questions through their presentation. That, maybe we can send it out and arrange this well in advance, and we can get our prospects to it from all over the province. Maybe they would feel a little more love. I call our guys regularly, once a month. The guys that I have in my 6-step program, all 6 of them, I talk to them every month, and they really appreciate that. But I was like, what can I do for these guys that would be different? And maybe Grand Lodge can help with something like that.
I just made a note of it.
Fantastic.
Matt, what do you get? What are your 3 or 2 or 1 or whatever, or 4 or 10 maybe?
I think everything that I have on my page here is sort of already been said. Communications is key, obviously, during this whole craziness. And I feel like there are lodges, the ones I'm familiar with in my district at least, because people still call me because no one saw my successor installed as district deputy because they didn't have Grand Lodge this year. So I still get phone calls asking me district deputy things. But from what I've seen in the lodges in the district, there are a couple that are doing a great job of having Zoom meetings and getting emails out to everybody and communicating. And there's some guys who get together and just call each other, and like you were saying, Steve, and that sort of thing. And there's another, at least one lodge in the district that has done nothing. And so essentially, they had a meeting in February, I guess was the last meeting, and then just radio silence. And that it makes you wonder if they're gonna be there when when meetings start again. Who's gonna show up? So I don't know how they would do it, but if there was some way for Grand Lodge to establish a floor to support these groups that are, I don't know if it's a matter of, calling the masters and saying, hey, what can we do to help you? Or if it's holding their feet to the fire or what it is, but if there's some way to check up on, through the deputies, I guess, check up on, I know our new deputy has been calling their secretary, it's one of those things. It's kind of a mess, but if there's some way to reinforce so that everything doesn't fall through the cracks between now and when we start again, hopefully someday soon.
So what you're saying is like there's a minimum expectation for what should be occurring at a Masonic Lodge under the current circumstances. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yes, and even if it's different from lodge to lodge, at least there should be something. Heck, even if you're sending out paper copies of a trestle board, there's got to be something. I would want more than that. I would want maybe phone calls to the older guys or whatever the program that your lodge figures out is. If you're a younger lodge and everyone's tech savvy and uses Zoom like we are now, great. if not phone calls, whatever it is. Yeah, some kind of expectation of communication of, yes, we're still here. Because I know we're getting ready to send out our dues notices here soon. And, hey, we haven't heard from you in 9 months. Here's a dues notice. It's going to be a rude awakening for some people. It's actually my one gripe about, to get on a sidetrack, my one gripe about Grandview, which, as I've said on this program before, I really like as a program, as a secretary, is it doesn't say who's getting the emails on the email. So I get an email from Grand Lodge that says, hey, this program is happening. And I don't know if my whole lodge has gotten it or if it's just me or what. So it's kind of confusing sometimes. And people say, why did I get 3 copies of this? And I didn't know. But it's better to have too much communication rather than not enough, I suppose. Another thing was mentioned earlier, our Grand Master has been having these once a month or so get together on Zoom. Anyone can show up and ask him questions and that sort of stuff. And I'm surprised how many people ask the same questions and questions that have been answered in previous meetings. And, I wish there were some way to say, dudes,
let's say it together. When are we going to meet? It's always the same question.
When are we going to hold elections? When are we going to have an installation? And
just a suggestion for you: he could record his Zoom meeting and post them on the Grand Lodge website. So anybody who missed that previous meeting, hey, go there, and then they won't be so tempted to ask.
Well, they'll still ask.
But my lodge is different. We should have our meetings because, dude, Dad said no. Just go back to your room. Dad said no. There's a. Yeah.
How clearly communicated was the Grand Master's? I presume he's closed all the lodges. There's no meetings. That was clearly communicated. Yeah. You see, part of the frustration when you do these things, again, having had this experience, is not all secretaries communicate out to the brethren. And so as a consequence, I can recall having a few conversations with guys that were quite upset about something that had been communicated weeks earlier. You come by for a visit, or you're on a official visit or something like that, and somebody buttonholes you and is really annoyed. How come? Well, we sent that notice out 2 months ago. Well, nobody told me. So that it kind of falls towards Grand Lodge in that regard. So,
well,
in many cases, it's not a Grand Lodge issue. So,
yeah, and they see it that way. But we've been talking about that in our lodge about the fact that we send email communications now, and we don't have a phoning committee anymore, and we don't have the mail out notice anymore. And, people are feeling like technology's taken our lodge away from a lot of the things that were to them traditional, right? When you think about now communicating messages out, I think having Grand Lodge having a phoning committee, phoning all those secretaries, or maybe their plan would be to email all the secretaries, the ones that don't respond, get a phone call, right? So that that they're getting the communications forwarded on to the brethren, because a lot of the guys who were already retired, now they really have nothing to do now that Lodge is not there. So they've gone fishing a lot more and so on. So
And so yesterday also was the District 2 Lodge Leadership Retreat presentation on how to run a meeting. But one of the guys who does the communication lesson always says that the biggest thing about communication is the illusion that it happened. And a lot of times you sort of say, what more can Grand Lodge do? It's sort of like you were saying, Steve, about the email's too long. I didn't read it. Well, then you don't know what's going on. Anyway. It's a tangled mess, and unfortunately not one that we are going to resolve before our time runs out, which is right about now. So I guess, Most Worshipful Sir, do you have any final thoughts on Grand Lodge and how help during these times?
Well, again, I think the original premise of the start of our discussion was, each of us has a role to play in making our Freemasonry that we experience meet our needs. And this is not a passive process. We have to be actively engaged in this, and our lodges have to be actively engaged, our districts, and of course our Grand Lodge officers. So if you take the personal responsibility and you start from there, how can I make Freemasonry work for me and make my world better? If you start from that premise and then kind of build it up, everything will align. And we each have roles to play at the various hierarchical levels in our organization. But if we start from that premise of I'm responsible for my Freemasonry, I have to make this work for me, then I have to make this work for my brothers, then my lodge, my district, and my jurisdiction. I think, we have to, start from there, inside out.
Well, me for one, I want to say thank you very much, Most Worshipful Brother Burch, for your time and again for coming on to our podcast yet another time. We really appreciate you and the striking conversations we have.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Stay well, brethren.
Yes, thank you, Most Worshipful. And on behalf of Steve and David, he unmuted, but he's back to mute again. So on behalf of Steve and David and myself, thanks for joining us on this conversation on the Working Tools Masonic Podcast. Goodbye.